Tihei Māori ora, ki te whai au ki te ao mārama tihei Māori ora e. Ko Matariki takitahi he nui ngā mata, he ko tahi nei te aronga. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Nau mai haere mai ki te aka Māori, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei kaupapa o Matariki, tangi hia rātau, ko whetūrangi hia, rātau ko haere atu ki te pai, o maumahana. Rātau kia rātau, tātou te pito ora kia tātou tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Ladies and gentlemen, I heard this yesterday, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Matariki Tauira. Here at the Aka Māori, each day for 9 days celebrating Matariki, we have a staff member from the Rotorua Lakes Council. What we do is we give them a star or a heavenly body to study, and then we ask them to come back, and 15 minutes each day they share what they've learned. 2.5 weeks ago they knew nothing about the star that they're talking about, and today they will share that knowledge with you. It's known as Matariki Tauira, the winter sky. Last year we looked at the various stars of Matariki. This year we're looking at all the heavenly bodies that adorn the sky that aren't in Matariki, because there are so many other stars and so many other stories, so many other elements that you can learn by studying the winter sky, e ai ki tā te Māori e ki te ai, through the Māori culture and through the Māori lens. Now, the person who is going to speak today will talk about Tama-nui-te-ra. We'll talk about the sun, the department, the ohu, that this person, our person, Ben Manley, works for, is the Amorangi unit. I'm part of that unit. It's our goal to cast a mātauranga Māori lens on the work that Council does, and then support Council to achieve their goals for tātou, to ensure that the kaupapa is fulfilled correctly. But the kaupapa for today is Matariki Tauira. And today I'd like to welcome everybody, give a big hand, and also just don't forget we have a cup of tea over here. We have our Pathfinder, and the Pathfinder lets you access all the kōrero around Matariki and the various stars in the winter sky. Please, homai te paki, kia Ben Manley me tāna kaupapa, ko Tama-nui-te-ra. Homai te paki.
Flash introduction. Hi, kia ora whānau. I like this, nice and personal. It's just like we're having a conversation. This is awesome. Better when you have a million eyes. So kia ora. I've put together a little bit of a kōrero on Tama-nui-te-ra, but I wanted to start with a bit of a question. Proxima Centauri, flash name, at 4.3 light years away is our closest star at night. True or false? Proxima Centauri. Is that a true statement or is it a false one? Closest star at night? True. True? Kind of. Our closest star at night is the sun. The Sol is our closest star. Proxima Centauri, which sits in Alpha Centauri, is actually our closest star, Tama-nui-te-ra. It's further than the sun. You might remember there used to be a TV program. It was called Lost in Space. And the Robertson family were trying to make their way to where? Remember? Alpha Centauri. That was where they were trying to get to. So that's our closest star. And it's part of the Alpha Centauri, Proxima Centauri. So every school child in New Zealand learns at some point the story of our solar system. Maybe you were taught how the solar system formed over 4 billion years ago, a little while ago. Maybe at school you drew a picture or made a model. Remember they used to make those little models with the balls and kind of hang them up. All of those kind of things that we used to do at school. Maybe you drew pictures of the 9 planets when I was growing up. Today apparently we have 8. Maybe so kids growing up today learn about the 8 planets. So that's that way of remembering planets that I used to have when I was a kid, which was my very flash Mercedes smashed up near Parramatta, I think it was. It was the way to remember all the names of the planets. Doesn't work anymore. But that's how I used to do it. So that's what we used to do at school. And perhaps you heard of the word solar means pertaining to the sun. Right, so solar system, the word sol is a Latin word and it means sun. The science teacher might have mentioned that the sun was near a perfect ball of burning plasma. Or if you watch Star Trek like I did, that's what you tended to see. Heated by nuclear fission, radiating the most important source of energy for life on Earth, wherever rising in the east and setting in the west. These are all things that we take for granted, things that we learn at school. This isn't the story that we're going to tell today, however. It's going to be a little bit different today. So for us in Te Ao Māori, those of us who grew up in the Māori world, or who like me have come back to the Māori world, our elders tell us about the many layers of darkness and light that gave birth to Papa Tuanuku and Rangi, the ground, or our Earth Mother and the Heavenly Father, who are, some people say atua, other people say personifications. So personification is a little bit different. It's treating that thing and giving it characteristics of humanity. So it's a little bit different to atua. So we have those kind of two. And from those two, there were birthed the many personifications, the many atua that inhabited the old world of the Māori. So we have all of those kind of stories, and a lot of us would have heard them in school. So from this union, there came the many plethora of atua, many tribal versions, many tribal different versions about different stories. You know, just like different people have different ways of telling a story, iwi and hapu have different ways of telling a story as well. So we have all of these different versions of different stories. There's a popular version which I really like, which I always thought was quite cool. It's actually from the Ngāti Awa people. And it tells the story of a husband and wife. Tama-nui-te-ra was the husband, and Wainui was the wife. And children of the tribal parents who themselves produce offspring. And there's some of them, I'll see a big list of them. I don't know how people remember them. But the ones that I remember quite well was Te Ra, and it was the sun. Tama-nui-te-ra, Te Marama, which was the moon, Ngā Whetū, the various stars, and moonlight is another one. So they all had these various children. And these offsprings had a really cool name, Te Whānau Marama, which kind of translates to the family of light, or celestial bodies, the family of celestial bodies. And there's a cool story that I originally heard this years ago, but I was having a little look because we're supposed to research things, as Keegan said. And so I was researching this story, and Rangi Matariki has done this really cool video. And he's the one who's kind of started this whole Matariki tree, the holiday and stuff. He did a really cool video on Tama-nui-te-ra, on parts of Tama-nui-te-ra. And so he tells this really cool story about there was this house that Tama had. It was called Hui Te Rangiora. And this is before there was daylight. And in this house, it was the first house in the world, as he says. And in this house, he had the moon in the middle, Marama in the middle, he had the sun near the doorway, and he had the stars above. And Tāne come to him, one of the other children of Papa Rangi, and said to him, I'd like to bring daylight into the world. And so Tāne was given those celestial bodies that were on the roof of the house, and he threw them up into the sky, and that's where we have some of the stars. And we have the sun. So it's a really cool, really, really interesting story about how they're affixed to the ceiling, to the celestial ceiling. So that's where they come from. The sun had many names, which were linked to as many attributes, and that's how things were back in the day. It's a bit like when we call people like William the Conqueror. You know, his name wasn't the Conqueror; that wasn't his last name. It was just an attribute that was given to him. Same with a lot of our people. We're given various names for things that they might have done, and same with some of our personifications. And so Tama-nui-te-ra had a few names. Te Ra, being one, the sun. Tama-nui-te-ra, Te Ra Tuoi, the lean sun. And during the summer, Te Ra Kura, the red sun. At midday, he might have been known as Te Paupau o Te Ra. And in fact, when we speak in Te Reo, when we talk in Māori, that's what we call midday, Te Paupau o Te Ra. Te Pautu Tama-nui-te-ra, the standing post of the sun. So he had various names and various names that kind of spoke of different attributes as he passed through the heavens. The flight of the sun across the sky, you know, from one to the end to the other, was called Te Manu-i-te-ra. I didn't know that one. I hadn't heard that one before, but I thought that was quite cool. Likening the sun to a bird. Kind of harkens back to other stories like Icarus. Next, we have a story that many of us have heard, perhaps in primary school, and it's a story, I don't know if everyone remembers this, but in primary school I read this book. We had it read to us, I can't quite remember. And those pictures you'll see quite a lot in our schools these days. And it's a story of Maui. mischievous Maori. And so there's a story that goes, in the early days, Tama-nui-te-ra, the sun, he was a little mischievous. He raced across the heavens with such haste that the days were far too short for humanity to carry out day-to-day tasks, like daylight savings. Maui, who was human-born and raised by the gods, hatched a plan to slow Tama-nui-te-ra's pace with the help of his older brothers. And again, it's all in the sport. They went to where Tama-nui-te-ra slept, surprising him and throwing ropes around him. Now they're captive, they refused to release him until he promised to slow his pace, which he soon promised to do. From that time forward, our days and nights were more equal. So that's a story that is actually common through a lot of nations in the Pacific here, First Nations, where they tell the story of Maui. He's quite a well-known character. When it comes to Tama-nui-te-ra himself, he was married to two sisters, daughters of the Atua Tangaroa-Wikwi. Again, that was not something that I knew, that was something I actually read about, which is really cool. Their names, which many of our kids learn in high school now, I see. Their names were Hene Raumati, who dwelled on the land, and Hene Takurua, who dwelled in the ocean. And so one of his wives dwelled on the whenua maid, and one of them dwelled in the ocean, but she also dwelled in the heavens as well. And so Tama-nui-te-ra divided his time between his two wives. When he was with Hene Raumati, he was close to Papatuanuku, and so Papatuanuku was so summer, I suppose. When he was with Hene Takurua, Tama-nui-te-ra was away from the land. He was in the ocean, or in some cases they say further out into the heavens. And so therefore, Papatuanuku was cold, Matariki. So we have our summer and our winter dichotomy. And this was the relationship between the two, with summer and winter. As with many of our personifications in Te Ao Māori, when we speak about them, they also had children. So Tama-nui-te-ra had children with both wives. With Hene Takurua, he had a son and a whole number of daughters, who themselves became stars in the heavens as well. With Hene Raumati, the summer maid, you read people like James Cowan, who's an early historian at the turn of the last century. He writes these very romanticised versions of legends. So when he translates some of these names, he gives them nice romantic names. So for Hene Raumati, the dawn maid, he called him, Tama-nui-te-ra had other children. One of the most famous is Tani-rori, which is one I heard about. It was embodied in the heat waves that shimmer over the plains in summer. Pariarohi is the shimmering heat seen in the edges of forests and over trees. Haven't heard that one before. Hiko is the reflection of sunlight from streams and pools. Hai, or Te Hai, which was an Atua pole. Right, so these are, again, personifications of natural environments. And there's this really cool story. It's a very well-known one in Te Arawa, because we talk about it quite a lot, which is Hene Nui-te-ra and Hene Raumati's son. Tani-rori can be seen in the heat waves over open spaces. So if you've ever been on the desert road, driving down to Wellington perhaps, it's a really, really hot day. And if you look into the distance, there's no cars here, look into the difference, you kind of see that shimmer, that shimmering wave. We say that that's Tani-rori, that's the embodiment of Tani-rori. And in fact, that wave is actually called Te Haka Tani-rori, the dance of Tani-rori. And this is actually the origin for the wiri. And so when you see Kamahaka on TV and things like that, you see people do namahi pēnei ana, the ring shaking like that. It's said to be the quivering of hands, which is supposed to imitate, I suppose, or reflect that shimmering that you see in the distance. So that's a few, there's a whole bunch of other stories as well to do with Tama-nui-te-ra, but that's a few I wanted to share. These ones are more about the story of the personification. There's other stories that talk about what plantings that you do at certain times in summer in regards to Tama-nui-te-ra. There's whakatauki, some old sayings that kind of mention Tama-nui-te-ra. So Tama-nui-te-ra was definitely seen as an important aspect of our day-to-day lives. What's different, I suppose, is that we, in the old days, we differentiated between Ngāwhetū and Tama-nui-te-ra. So today, we would say that, we understand that the sun is actually a star, just like there's many stars that we see in the sky. But in I suppose, Te Ao Māori cosmology, we kind of see them as a little bit different. Siblings, yes, related to each other, yes, but being very, very So I hope that's just a quick little kōrero about Tama-nui-te-ra. I learned a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't actually know, and I thought was really, really interesting. Some of the kōrero is what we say is hōpunu. It's very, very deep, especially to do with plantings, because there's the story of the origins, the pūtaki or where they come from or why they're there. But then there's also the mechanics of what it actually means on the ground. So in the old days, what did I need to plant in summer? What was going to thrive? During the winter, do I plant in winter? If I do plant in winter, what types of things would actually develop for that kind of stuff? So there's a practical side of knowledge as well that's a little bit different to some of the stuff that so that's what I wanted to talk about today. Tama-nui-te-ra. I've always had a fascination with astronomy and all of that kind of stuff, cosmology. With Te Ao Māori, we talk about the creation of the universe in a certain way. If you have a look at Roman, Greco-Roman type kōrero, you'll see that they have kind of a similar way of looking at it. You have a look at our Aboriginal cousins across the way. In Australia, they talk about the dream time, again, which is very, very different from ours. Very, very different actually. But there's similarities, and they were trying to explain how natural things worked in the world. They made observations, just like scientists really. They made observations, they drew conclusions, and then they made narratives. Why they're so important, and the same with Matariki. Why they're so important, and why the stories are really important, is it's great to know the science behind it. It's great to understand that that these stars are burning with gases billions of miles away. That's good. But how our people interpreted things on the ground that we looked up in the old days, and the stories that we gave to them, the kōrero that we gave to them, those personifications, they talk more about the people. Rather than the attribute, the celestial body, the stories that we have for those things are important. They're just as important because they reflect the people of the time and how they believed, how they lived, how they loved, all of those kind of things. So that's the interesting thing, and that's the amazing thing about understanding a lot of these old stories. And with that, does anyone have any questions? Not that I might be able to answer them, because I've just learned a lot of the stuff myself. But if you have any questions, I might be able to think about it. If you don't, all good.
Like if we had the sun, we rely on the sun to dry our washing.
Yes.
Make things grow.
Yep.
And without the sun, I don't think without the sun we wouldn't survive.
Definitely. I think a lot of the energy that we use on Earth comes from the sun. Even the when you look at looking more at the science side of it, the carbon that makes up our bodies, that makes up our tima, originates from the hearts of stars that existed long time ago. That fused the carbon together, they blew them out, and then over time they spread across the universe. That's why they always say, humanity is made of literally made of starlight. We actually come from stars.
And the sun warms us up.
Yeah, it warms us up. Yeah, otherwise we'd all be living underground. I don't know.
We wouldn't be here.
No, that's right.
It warms us up.
That's right. Keeps us warm, gives us our light so we can actually see to be able to do those kind of things. And that's what the people at the time were trying to do, is explain a lot of those elements and their understanding. But with that, my short little kōrero, did that hit my 10 minutes?
Yeah.
Thank you for coming along on a Sunday. At least it's nice and warm. Cool.
Another paki for being Manley of the Te Amorangi unit team. And a big paki to Te Apamori for creating Matariki Tauira, so that we were able to have all these staff members come and talk about what they just learned. Ben is an awesome researcher, so he knows a lot about Te Ao Māori, but even just to know that Ben knew that he knows a lot about the sun, but he researched more, gave us more information as well. Tangaroa Kwikwi. Tangaroa Kwikwi. So, how's that in Moonlight as a child of Tango and Wayne? So with that, don't forget we have our Pathfinders. This is all part of Matariki Takitahi. Matariki Takitahi is a constellation of events that are being held under the auspices of the Rotorua Lakes Council. So, Matariki Tauira, Ben, we can say this now. You've moved from a Matariki Tauira, which is a student of Matariki, to a Matariki Tauira, which is an exemplification of what it is to be Matariki, and to shine down your knowledge so that others may learn. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia whakairia ki te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tūruki whakataha ai, kia tūruki whakataha ai, haumi e hui e.
Taiki.
Kia ora rā. And tomorrow we have Christine Hutchison from the Parks and Reserves team, and she will be talking about the moon. Te marama, tēnā tātou. We still have a cup of tea.